Tzarayim Tovim. This week we're discussing Parshat BeShalach. United we stand and thrive. Before I begin, I just want to share that next week Ken and I will be on vacation. So I am going to be recording Parshat Yitro before next Thursday. I just don't know when it will be. It will be at some random time, perhaps tomorrow morning, perhaps later today. And just hold it and you can see it whenever you want just by scrolling. You all know how to do that by now. This discussion on Parshat BeShalach will incorporate a lot of material from my Rav, our family's Rav here in Philadelphia, Rabbi Eliezer Hirsch, of Makor HaBracha in Philadelphia. In a Devar Torah he graciously wrote and shared several years ago for the Eshel community that I hold so dear, of observant LGBTQ plus folks, Jewish folks, for this Parsha. These words reflect Rabbi Hirsch's incredible ability to truly bring together a community of diversity in so many ways, to form the unique and treasured community of Makor HaBracha, our family shul. I will indicate when I'm using his teaching. Parshat BeShalach is known as Shabbat Shirah, the Shabbat of Song. This name refers to the famed Az Yashir song the Jewish people spontaneously sang to God at the shores of the Red Sea, united as one regardless of the differences that exist amongst them. Maybe, in fact, those differences made the unity of so many various individuals amongst the collective all the more powerful, and inspired none other than Ribbonu Shel Olam. God split the waters so that they could traverse the sea as a united group, and then drowned the entire Egyptian army, we are taught, behind them, inspiring the group to recognize their unity and to sing a song of praise and thanksgiving. There is one hint as to the dynamics of the unity of the group interfaced with the individuality of the diversity of those who made up the group in our text. In the end of Parak 14 through the beginning of chapter 15, we read, the children of Israel went on the dry land, B'nai Yisrael halchu v'yavasha b'toch hayam v'hamayim lahem chamam yemechem u'mismalam. And the water was to them like a wall on the right and to the left. V'yosha Hashem b'yamahu et Yisrael miyad Mitzrayim v'yar Yisrael et Mitzrayim et asfat hayam. On that day, God saved Israel from the hands of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dying on the seashore. One of the things that we are going to note in this text is the interchanged use of the singular and the plural. The plural indicating the many individuals that make up the collective, and the singular indicating the unity of that collective, and therefore its strength. V'yar Yisrael et yad hagadolah asher asa Hashem b'Mitzrayim. V'yir'u ha'am et Hashem v'ya'aminu b'ad Hashem u'b'Moshe avdo. In this pasuk, we see both the singular and the plural. Yisrael sees as a singularity the great hand of God and what God did upon the Mitzrayim. And the people feared, had awe for God, and they believed in the Lord and in Moshe. So they saw as a unified whole what was done, and then as individuals confirmed and reaffirmed their faith and their belief in God and in Moshe. It is at this point that we come to the text that we repeat every day in our tefillot. Az Yashir Moshe B'nai Yisrael Tashirah. Then sang Moshe and all of the children of Israel this song to God, Vayomru, and they said, Ashira Ladoshem. And they said, I will sing to the Lord. Again, coming together as individuals, having fear or awe as individuals, and finding strength as one unified whole. Notice that these different verb forms, singular and plural, are being used, and that we are acknowledging who made up the unified Yisrael, the individuality of the various parts, while we maintain the distinctions. The unity of the whole has its own specific entity. Before we go any further, we want to be careful and ask, what exactly do we know about who left Mitzrayim and the composition of the group that did exist? Last week we read as follows. Vayisu B'nai Yisrael, the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot, about 600,000, 600,000 raglei hagvarim, of the men on foot, besides the young children, levad hataf. So, who is traveling? Who is being counted in the 600? And also went with them an Erev Rav, a mixed multitude. Who is this mixed multitude? And there are many, many suggestions and many questions we have about who exactly left, how unified were they? Were they one being, or were they more than one? Were they a group, or were they being acknowledged as all the individuals that they were? So here we are left with several questions. First of all, Ibn Ezra suggests that there were Egyptians that left with the Jewish people. That's the mixed multitude. The Zohar suggests that it's a mixed multitude of nations of proselytes, of others besides Jews. So we ask the following questions. 1. Did all Jews leave Mitzrayim as we are traditionally taught? According to the Mechilta's conservative estimate, the number who actually left is put at 20% of the Jewish population. Objectively speaking, this is potentially understandable, as while we look at slavery and unjust oppression, there may have been enough reason for everyone to, there may not, have been enough reason for everyone to take the risk in leaving what they knew for what they would not know. 2. Who is the Erev Rav meant to conclude? Why would Egyptians join them? Who were the proselytes? If this was indeed the culture of the Egyptian empire, so to speak, clearly all those who were not individuals of privilege, as identified by the ruler, would potentially also suffer. And maybe they want to leave as well, not just the Jews. I will tell you that I remember very well when Soviet Jews were leaving Russia, a lot of people were coming out who didn't even identify as Jews, but wanted to leave along with the Soviet Jews. This is a possibility that we should consider. 3. Is the mention of the men with the young children to be taken as a literal expression, or rather a setting of boundaries? In other words, the soup to nuts notion. Everyone from adult men to the littlest of children are included. At any rate, it is most reasonable to propose that this group was not as homogeneous as one might hope to think. In other words, all righteous and beleaguered Jews, as opposed to all others terrible people, not as righteous or deserving as of God's care. Dr. Rabbi David Zucker teaches as follows regarding the meaning of Erev Rav and who might be included in this expression. He speaks of V'gam Erev Rav Allah Itam. When the Israelites left, this mixed multitude went with them. So starting with the first word, Erev, Ayin, Resh, Vet. Shaul Bar, professor of Bible and at the University of Memphis, notes that in a number of biblical contexts, this term seems to refer to soldiers. Similarly, Israel Noel, professor emeritus of Tanakh at Hebrew University, suggests that it may be a cognate of the Akkadian word urbi, U-R-B-I, Ayin Resh Bet, which refers to a type of soldier. Whether or not Bar and Noel are correct here, this is certainly not how the term has been interpreted traditionally. Instead, the common understanding assumes that Erev here means mix. It comes, Erev, evening, mixture of dark and light, what we call dusk. That it comes from the idea of Eruv, where you mix properties to create one unified whole. And that it refers to the nature of the group itself as being a mixture of people. In other words, using a singular phrase or expression to acknowledge the diversity that existed within the group. The second word, Rav, is an adjective meaning great or many, and thus the standard translation of the term Erev Rav comes to us as mixed multitude. William Propp notes that Shemot, chapter 12, verse 38, gives no indication of how numerous the Erev Rav was. Nevertheless, the Midrash, as it wants to, takes this very far. Thus, the Mechilta Rabbi Yishmael glosses over the term Erev Rav and explains, Me'av Esrim Rabbo Divrei Rabbi Yishmael, 1,200,000. These are the words of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Akiva says 2,400,000. Rabbi Natan says 3,600,000. Multiplying the one number that we do have by varying amounts, given familial units, to get to what they think might have been the whole. So there are many, many explanations of what the numbers are, who the Erev Rav is, who left, who didn't leave. We don't know for sure. Whatever the number may have been, and whatever the nature of the groups who were included, we do note that this was indeed a diverse collection, perhaps united not so much in identity as in leaving the oppressive situation in which they found themselves. Simultaneously, it is highly likely that not all of the group that we celebrate and acknowledge in this story were among the mixed multitude. At any rate, in our Parsha, our sages teach us that the song itself, probably sung by those we do traditionally include in the narrative of Yetziat Mitzrayim, represents the heights of faith and spirituality that the people ascended to as a collective because of this miracle. Rabbi Hirsch wants us to know that, as the Mechilta tells us, a simple maidservant present at the splitting of the sea saw more of God's presence than the greatest of prophets of all times. Here we are looking at an existential crisis, as the B'nai Yisrael, a collective of individuals, as well as the united whole, are fighting for their very survival. One could make the same case for the Egyptian entity, continually going back and forth regarding the fears they have individually and collectively, regarding what they perceive to be as this formidable group, the B'nai Yisrael. Note what we read in our text in chapter 14, verse 10. Paro hikriv, vayis'u B'nai Yisrael et einehem v'hinei Mitzrayim nosea achareim v'yir'u ma'ov v'yitzaku B'nai Yisrael et Hashem. Pharaoh draws near, the children of Israel lift up their eyes, and behold, they see the Egyptians coming after them. They are very frightened, and they cry out to God. Again, let's pay attention to the intentional use of the singular and the plural. Rashi says that here the Egyptians are united with one heart, like one person, in their desire to overtake and subdue Israel. Interestingly enough, a phrase almost identical to this, like one man with one heart, also describes the Jewish people as they are about to receive the Torah at Sinai. I would like to suggest that we look at these terms here and the tenses that Rashi does not acknowledge. The plural is used for the B'nai Yisrael, and they see Mitzrayim, the Mitzrim, advancing after them in one united whole, nosea, singular verb, and they lose their united front, at which point they cry out, Yir'u, and they are afraid. I find it fascinating to correlate when the singular is used, when the plural is used, and the emotional status indicated at each point. God unites them. God gives them strength. God will save the single collective that will ultimately include all of the individuals with all of their differences and their perspectives. One could, and I would, make the point that while God is uniting the parts into a strong and viable whole, that collective, in turn, is strengthened by the many differences of the individuals contributing to the diversity of the group. I will go out on a limb here and propose that perhaps the real meaning here is that those who have experienced the lack of freedom, lack of agency of self, and ability to reach the heights that faith in God can bring us to, totally understand the need of their own group, as well as all people, to experience these phenomena in our own lives. Perhaps looking at Erev Rav from inside the Jewish perspective. Sure, we understand you were also persecuted. You may come with us. We will share what we have. We will have you join us. Rabbi Hirsch points out the following. This is the story that is told in the first 58 verses of Parshat BeShalach, which constitute exactly half of the 116 verses in the Parsha. In dramatic contrast The second 58 verses of the Parsha tell about their abrupt fall from grace, loss of confidence. The Jewish people complain bitterly about conditions in the desert, bemoaning their individual needs, losing sight of the wonder of the group and how God has elevated them. These many separate individuals are complaining bitterly about the water, the food, and repeatedly ask why God would take them out of Egypt to die in the desert. This loss of unity, lack of caring about others, and the rebellions and the divisiveness that result are in no small way responsible for the events that will now transpire. In a stunning reversal, the Jewish people begin to doubt God. Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu? Is God not with us in our midst? And again, Rabbi Hirsch continues. And they do so immediately after all that they have just witnessed and experienced. Our sages teach that once the Jewish people lost faith, they became vulnerable to the attack of the evil nation of Amalek. A threat was unthinkable before, but very present now, because all the nations of the world feared the chosen people who had performed their mission of bringing God into the world with the strength of that unity. Without it, they will also begin to suffer from the different needs of individuals in their midst, and while focusing on individual needs and complaints, they will lose the collective power of the group. Further, as time goes on, these individual setbacks will lead to major disruption in the unity just expressed collectively by the group. How can we explain this dramatic fall from grace? Rabbi Hirsch teaches, I think we can find an answer from the words of one of my esteemed teachers regarding the famous story about Eliyahu, the prophet at Har Carmel. In one of the most iconic moments in Jewish history, Eliyahu challenges the idol-worshipping prophets to a competition to see which God would answer their prayers. After many hours, the prophets of the idol Baal receive no responses, but following Eliyahu's prayers, a fire immediately descends from the heavens, devouring his sacrifice and making him the victor. The Jewish people respond to this miracle by prostrating themselves and declaring as a unified whole, Adoshem hu Elokim, our God is the true God, which are the final words that we recite repeatedly at the end of Yom Kippur. However, when the evil queen Jezebel, receives word of her arch-rival's accomplishments, she sends him a message saying, I am going to kill you tomorrow. Eliyahu reacts with great despair and begs God to take him from the earth. Soon after, God complies, and Eliyahu ascends to the heavens in dramatic fashion. We might ask, why would Eliyahu be shocked at Jezebel's message and be so concerned about her threat? After all, he knew that she was an evil monarch, and he had no reason to expect her ways to change simply because of one miracle. The answer lies in Jezebel's precise words, I will kill you tomorrow. Tomorrow, not today. She knew Eliyahu had become a hero, and he was untouchable. He was one with God. But she also knew that his privileged status was ephemeral. The next day, everyone would forget and move on in their various directions, and she could kill him without protest. Eliyahu realized that she was right. He could perform a spectacular miracle, but that would never bring the lasting change because he was just one individual person, not able to achieve the heights of faith and achievement that is possible for the collective. This is the message of the Red Sea. The impact of the amazing miracle was inspirational, but inspiration by itself is not enough because excitement alone cannot be sustained. It must be accompanied by concrete actions and tangible initiatives. In other words, what we see here are examples of the following. 1. Unity and purpose, which elevates the group as well as those that may join the group in the Erev Rav and take further inspiration from the experience of the B'nai Yisrael as they overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. 2. the potential downfall and suffering of all when this unity of purpose is not felt and individual fears and doubts take over. And 3, the understanding that truly, united we stand, divided we fall. Jewish identity and life is communal in so many ways, as are the successes indicated in the first part of our Parshat, and that we have been learning in the last weeks. This is the story that we tell at Pesach. This is the lesson that should and must guide our lives. This is what we pass on to our children in the drama of the Seder. This is what we are sent out to do in BeShalach. Rabbi Hirsch continues, in religion, as in other commitments, the only thing that endures is the consistent effort we make each day, day after day. Many of us think to ourselves, if only God would send me one miracle, it would change me forever and I'd be committed to God. But that approach does not work with God, nor with any relationship. Our serious commitments are only sustainable when they are grounded in the routines of our everyday life and we understand the place of all and each of us in the collective. Of course, it is vital to seek inspiration in life, to ignite our excitement and spark our motivation. But Parshat BeShalach teaches us that the only way to solidify the meaningful relationships in our lives and our connections to Judaism, Torah, our community of B'nai Yisrael, and to God is to double down on those daily actions and be ever mindful that we must stay the course, including all in our community as we do so. I would like to suggest that as we engage in these daily actions, we must also recognize the most foundational elements of continued Jewish law. 1, we must maintain faith in God and acknowledge that God is the only higher power in our lives. 2, there is value in the power and the experience of the group. This is why it is preferable to pray with a group, with a minyan, a standard that no other religious grouping sets in their code of practice. And 3, we must remember that our mitzvot are both mitzvot ben adam l'makom, between us and God, as well as mitzvot ben adam l'chavero, mitzvot between us and each other. Our very success in reaching God in a meaningful way will depend on our understanding the connection between these two categories of mitzvot. We must remember that our commanded actions between each other are also mitzvot ben adam l'makom, mitzvot between us and God, not an additional category exclusive of God not being in the relationship, but rather all collectively interacting with each other. While some may wish to relegate the mitzvot ben adam l'chavero, those commandments between us and each other, to a lesser important status, this totally misses the point of the Jewish law as it is given. In our own context, we see way too much expression of individual hubris and note the obvious dissension and destruction it brings. We in our community must remember to include all who come to us as members of the collective, regardless of the many differences amongst them. Let us imagine, really consider for a moment, what Shirat Hayam must have brought together. I love to listen to choral renditions of Shirat Hayam, where you see different voices, you see harmonies, you see all these variations that combine together to create this multifaceted and beautiful, audibly colorful piece. This can only happen with different voices, different abilities, harmonies that create something beautiful. What does this teach us about our community today and the potential strength of the collective when we include everyone and consider what we can learn from each other? How do we celebrate and acknowledge and facilitate such diversity in our own lives? What will we teach this coming Pesach at our Sedarim about the value of truly bringing it all together? And in so doing, Rabbi Hirsch wants us to ask ourselves one final question. What can I, as a member of my Jewish community, contribute to the collective to ensure that we maintain the excitement of the first half of our Parsha and not succumb to the downfall of the second half. Shabbat Shalom.